Welcome to Kicking Your Teen's Troubles to the Curb with host Christina Nation, the ultimate guide for parents navigating the challenging yet rewarding journey of raising teenagers. Join your host Christina as she dives deep into the world of adolescence, tackling everything from academic pressures and social dynamics to mental health and independence. So please, welcome the host of Kicking Your Teen's Troubles to the Curb, Christina Nation.
Hello and welcome to Kick Your Teen's Troubles to the Curb. I am super excited today to have my guest, Rita Morris. I'm going to go ahead and introduce her. She is a proud mom to two amazing kids, Jacob, 21, and Livy, 17, who keep life meaningful and always interesting. Outside of work, she loves quilting, seasonal decorating. She can't resist a well styled mantle and soaking up the beauty of New England's changing seasons. She is the founder of Co Parents Path and has been a therapist, certified coach, and divorce mediator for over 20 years. She specializes in helping divorced and divorcing parents communicate better so their kids can thrive. Whether it's co parenting, parenting plans, or working through the emotional aftermath of divorce, she guides parents towards clarity, peace, and child centered solutions. Welcome, Rita.
Thank you, Christina. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, it's going to be great. I'm so glad that you're here to have this really important conversation with us today. And as I'm sure you'll talk about, but more and more we're hearing of divorces, separations, and how co-parents, like none of us want our children to have negative impact by that. So I'm so glad that you're here to talk to us about how we can make things better through that process. So why don't you first start with sharing a little bit how you started doing this work?
So, I have been in the field of helping people for the better part of 20 something years. I started out as a therapist and then sort of felt like I needed to niche down a little bit and do something a little bit different. Um, and so, I thought about what had impacted me so much in my life and realized that, um, I was a child who grew up in a family where there was a lot of conflict, and my parents stayed together because they thought that was the right thing to do for my sister and I. And I saw how that impacted our whole family. And I thought, you know what? There's got to be a better way. So I decided to try to be a part of the better way. And
Yeah.
so that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us. So, a lot of times when we are thinking of divorce, we have children, we're worrying about what kind of impact that's going to have for our children. And especially during the teen years, I know my parents divorced when I was 14, and it was, middle school is already tough, and then you got a divorce, right?
Yeah.
And then divorce on top, it was very challenging. And so, how do you think that divorce typically affects teenagers' emotional well being and mental health?
Well, so there's so many different ways that I could answer that. And I think what I'm going to say is divorce can trigger a wide range of emotional responses in teenagers. You're going to see sadness, anger, guilt, anxiety, even sometimes relief, believe it or not. Um, Teenagers will report feeling torn between their parents or pressured to take sides. And if the conflict is high or ongoing, it's really going to contribute to depression, low self esteem, social withdrawal, all of those things. But the emotional outcomes are really going to vary depending on the primarily on the level of parental conflict and the support that the teenager gets, and the personality and their coping skills, and any other particular challenges that they might have. But above all else, what the research tells us is that it's the level of conflict between the parents that's really going to make the biggest difference.
So it's not necessarily even the divorce or separation as much as the conflict. So whether that conflict is there and you remain married, or or you decide to divorce and that conflict's there, that's the piece that's really contributing to the poor outcomes. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Yes. I say all the time, it's not your family structure that's really going to impact, it's the family dynamic more than anything else.
Mhm. Yeah. So that kind of leads me to the next question, and that was, would you say that divorce is generally harmful to kids, or can it sometimes lead to positive growth and resilience?
I would not say blanket statement that it's harmful to kids. Again, it's really about the ways that the parents are going to manage it. And if you think about what's the situation like at home to begin with, if people are considering divorce, to me, that makes me think, you know what, they're not really happy together. There's probably a lot of tension. There's probably a lot of conflict. And being in that environment is not necessarily good for anybody either. And so,
Mhm.
if we can extract ourselves from the conflict and the stress of that, I always say happy parents are better parents. So,
Mhm.
we all hear so much about self-care, and I know it's really kind of a buzzword these days, but when you think about what we do on a daily basis, it's so important that we all have a level of contentment that we can sort of start from on the daily basis.
I really like that. So happy parents are better parents. Gosh, that is
Hmm.
so true. True. Yeah. And so, but that is often the case, right? That if we are going through a divorce, that typically means because we are unhappy, which a lot of times lends to that high conflict. And that high conflict can be what's damaging to everyone involved, right?
Hmm.
So that's what I love about what you do is then you help support parents through that really high conflict emotional time of their lives, and try to find ways to be more peaceful and handle that conflict a little bit better so that it's not so damaging, right? I
Yes.
love that. Yeah. So then would you say, like we said though, that the divorce itself may not be harmful, but usually the conflict is, and a lot of times there is high conflict. So do you think that teens tend to experience long-term effects from their divorce? And if so, what are some of those outcomes?
100% they do. Again, not all of them. It depends on the kid. It depends on their level of resilience, their coping skills, all of the things. But some of them do. And, not all of those outcomes are negative. Common kind of long term challenges are going to include like difficulties trusting people in relationships, fear of commitment, definitely an increased risk of depression or anxiety in adulthood. Um, that being said, many kids are also going to develop strengths such as like empathy, independence, and adaptability, particularly when they get strong emotional support and they see their parents continuing to work together on their behalf.
Right, right. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I focus so much on, is really helping people um, to focus on what's important, which is their kids' well-being, right? So when you put that at the center, and it really helps people to put aside their own emotional challenges with their co-parent. to be able to say, okay, am I making this decision in the best interest of my child, or am I making this decision as kind of a revenge factor towards my co-parent?
Yeah. 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 I mean, being through divorce myself with children, it is a very, very challenging time because there are such high emotions. And it's, I mean, that's the whole reason that you're going, thinking of divorce is because you're not able to get along.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
then, getting along during that even more heightened sense of divorce is just even more difficult. But when you do focus on what's best for your children, then you can start to manage, you know, those high emotions, right? So, yeah. So let's kind of shift then and talk about how parents can help their teenagers cope better during and after the divorce process.
Um, a lot of it is being available to them emotionally. It's if you think about what a kid is going through now, and everybody in the family is going through it. It's important to say, right? Like this is a huge transition for everybody, and it involves loss and sadness and anger and frustration and resentment, all the things, right? And kids are not a part of the decision making process, right? So now they also feel like they've lost control. So being able to be there to support them, hear what they have to say, validate their feelings. And you know what? Some of that stuff is going to be really hard to hear. I hate going back and forth between two houses. Why do I have to do this? This isn't my fault. All of those things. And just being able to say, I know you hate it, and I'm sorry that you hate it, and I'm sorry that this is so hard for you. What can we do to try to make it a little bit better? We can't necessarily change the circumstances, but what can we try to do to make it a little bit better? So, giving them the emotional support they need in a way that's neutral so that they feel like they can come to you, that's non judgmental, and that's open minded is really so important for the kids.
Yeah. I want to unpack this a lot more, definitely, but something just came to mind that I wanted to ask because you said that teenagers aren't usually a part of the decision process. But when we are getting divorced and we have teenagers, do teenagers not have a say in, like, do they live full time with mom or dad or go back and forth 50-50? What is your thoughts and opinions? Should they have a part, a say in that decision, or is it between the parents and the judge? Or so you also work with parents through the parenting. Um, oh, I just forgot what it's called, parenting plan.
Parenting
Um,
plan, yep.
yeah, yeah. So what are your thoughts around that?
So just to clarify, when I said they don't have a choice, they don't have a choice about their parents ending their marriage, is what I meant. Unfortunately, the laws differ from state to state. But do I think that teenagers should have a say? 100%. I think that kids need to have relationships with both of their parents, and they deserve to be able to have that. I don't necessarily think that sleeping in one house 50% of the time and the other house 50% of the time is going to necessarily lead to good relationships with both parents. I've actually seen many cases where kids will live in one house but spend a significant amount of time with the other parent, and the relationship is better because they're not feeling like, now I have to pack all my stuff, and oh my god, I forgot my cleats at mom's house, and now I have to go back to dad's house, and mom's going to be mad because I forgot, all of those kind of logistical things that get in the way. So I do believe that teenagers should have a say in their living arrangements 100%.
Yeah. And then how do you have that conversation without them feeling the pressure of choosing, you know?
In an ideal world, it's you could come together as a family because, again, a romantic relationship has ended, but a family has not, right? Come together as a family and say, we really want to hear what you think works for you. We both love you. We're always going to love you. That's never going to change. And this is hard for you. And we want to do the best to make it as easy as we can. And we're not going to be offended. You need to focus on what's important for you. And we want to hear it. So just opening that door to communication and giving them the opportunity to voice what they need, I think is really important. And the language is really important. Sort of using neutral, non-judgmental language is going to be
Mhm.
really, really important.
Yeah. And again, I think that could be difficult for some parents too because of that heightened emotional state and most times they have a strong preference for the choices that are made
Mm.
and you know I I know for sure one of the things that was hardest that I had to keep reminding myself during the process is not to talk negatively about their father and not to try to influence their decisions or place judgment on their spending time together or any of those things. So maybe you could talk a little bit, about that. So maybe we could talk a little bit about some first, like some do not do. Uh, and then get into what we can do to best support.
You just brought up something really important, Christina, which is, you know, never talk negatively about your spouse to your kids. And while I agree with that 100%, and I'm going to explain why, whether our kids are our biological kids or not, we are their mirrors. They see themselves in us. So
Mhm.
if we are talking negatively about their other parent, their next thought is going to be, hmm, if you think that about my other parent, is that what you think about me? Is that how you feel
Mhm.
about me? Right? So
Mhm.
you really want to be very careful about that. By the same token, I think for whatever reason, our culture has kind of taken that way to an extreme. And when I say that is if your kid comes to you and says, when I'm with my other parent, like they don't pay any attention to me, they're always on their phone, or they're always at work, or they leave me with a babysitter, hear their feelings,
Mhm.
validate their feelings in a way that is not disrespectful to their other parent, but that honors their feelings. Because if you don't, the kids are going to wind up feeling like their feelings aren't important, they're not valid, and maybe they might even start to second guess their own judgment. So,
Yes.
yes, you don't want to speak negatively of their other parent, but you also don't want to mow over their feelings when they have a frustration.
That I am so glad that you talked about that because just even as you're saying it, I'm thinking to myself that in um trying to do my part to ensure that my kids have a good relationship with their parent, I probably made excuses for them and their actions more than validated
Mm-hmm.
my child's
Mm-hmm.
feelings. I could
Mm-hmm.
totally see that, and I could see how, that would, land for my child not feeling validated, and yeah, I'm so glad that you pointed that out. That's really important. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a really fine line, but it's a really, really important piece. And if you think about it, if you had stayed married and they came to you and said, "Oh my God, I hate it when dad does this," or "I hate it when mom does this," you probably would say, "I know, I hate that too." Right? Or
Mhm.
"I'm sorry you feel that way." But because in this culture, we have been so um, socialized to don't say anything bad about their other parent, we don't tend to validate those feelings.
Yeah, yeah. So important. All right. Well, let's start to unpack a little bit about, or before we do you have any other like don'ts that we should try to avoid when we're going through a divorce?
Um, yes, actually, one other thing that I find to be really important is when kids are making transitions from one home to another, keep the transition short and sweet. Like, I know you're going to miss your kids. I miss my kids when they're not with me all the time. But, go have a good time. I'll see you when you get back. You know, super simple, super, short and sweet kind of thing. And as much as you can, try to keep the tension to a minimum between the parents. If you can be, hey, how are you? Have a great time together. I'll see you later. Keep it light is going to make it so much easier for your kids to go back and forth.
Yeah, 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 that is great because transitions can be really difficult, right?
Absolutely. For all of us, right? Because now you think,
Mhm.
like, I have one mom that I'm working with now. She was a stay at home mom. And now there's 50-50 custody. And she's like, now there's this big hole in my life. What do I do? So it would be really easy for her to be so sad and show her kids how sad she is. And I'm going to miss you. And we tend to think that sharing that with them makes them feel loved, but it really makes them feel guilty
Mm,
and makes them
mhm.
feel like they have some sense of responsibility for us and our well-being.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see how that could be so detrimental for our kids and like feeling like they have to, be there for us to be happy, or that the kids feel that they have to, be there for us to be happy, and if they're leaving then they're causing our unhappiness, and that could put them in, feeling like, yeah, that's a huge feeling to leave them with. Yeah. So, what are some other ways that us as parents can, help our teens cope better through this process? So, like we mentioned, the conflict is high. We want to, avoid talking ill about the other while validating feelings. And I think you started off with really mentioning the importance of, hearing them, making sure that they feel heard, and validating the feelings that they're experiencing while going through this. What are some other tips you have for us to help them cope better?
It's honestly, it's all about the connection that we have with our kids. And so continuing to find ways to strengthen that connection, and then open, consistent, non-judgmental communication is also a major protective factor for your kids. When they feel heard and trusted, they're more likely to talk to us about their feelings. They're more likely to ask questions and to process through all of those feelings. So it's staying emotionally available and respectful of their experience, even when it's painful to hear, because it will be. That's really going to create a buffer against the long-term emotional fallout.
Yeah, I think that's so important that you focus. And it's like everything that the work that I do and everyone I talk to, it always comes back to that number one being connection. And you're
Mm-hmm.
saying it's the same thing here, that number one is coming back to the connection, and how you said being emotionally available. And I think that that is what is key and really hard for parents going through a divorce, is because they are so absorbed by their pain and their
Mm-hmm.
stress and their
Mm-hmm.
overwhelm and all about them in that moment, that
Mm-hmm.
they may not have the capacity to be available and present for their teen, right? So maybe that's where a lot of that disconnect comes in, and why our teens struggle.
hmm And that's where, again, it's the self care piece, right? But like when I talk about self care, I'm talking about, are you getting enough sleep? Are you hydrating well enough? Are you having any kind of downtime? Like, I'm not talking, I mean, it's lovely to go to the spa and have a weekend away and all of those things. Often not feasible, financially, time wise, all of the things. So, on the daily, are you getting outside and getting a little bit of sunshine? Are you getting a little bit of movement, even if it's just walking around the block? Are you sleeping well? If you're not, let's figure out why and try to get that, into place. Making sure you're drinking enough water every day. All of those little things are really going to help you to be in a better place on a regular basis. So when I talk about self-care, I talk about it's the stuff we do on the daily more than the stuff we do on the quarterly or monthly kind of thing. And so to be emotionally available to your kids, we have to be in a good place ourselves. So like I think about, if your phone battery was low, would you stream a 4K video? Probably not, because it's going to drain your battery, right? You might go plug your phone in and charge it up. We also need to be charged up in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense that, like you said, it's kind of a buzzword, that self-care, but it's even more important when we're going through a huge transition, such as divorce and all of the emotions that that brings. And so, like you said, a happy parents better. So then focusing on our own well-being, so that we can be present for our team. So like you said, focusing on our own well-being can look like self-care. And like you said, self-care can basically be taking care of your basic needs, right? It doesn't
Uh-huh.
have to
Yes.
be some huge luxurious thing, but just taking care of our basic needs. And like you said, getting out in the sunshine, getting out in nature, um, talking with a friend, possibly, attending a church service or some sort of community support. Um, and then well, I have a couple more questions that are coming up for me, but we're going to go ahead and take a quick break.
Okay.
And then we will dive into this conversation more when we return. So, you are watching Kick Your Teens Troubles to the Curb. And with me today is Rita Morris, and we are talking about how to better support our teens through the process of our divorce. And we will be right back after this sponsor break.
Mike Zorek, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorek, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorek has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk on the BBM Global Network.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Hello, and welcome back to Kick Your Teens Troubles to the Curb. I'm your host, Christina Nation. We are streaming on Bold Brave TV, and today my guest is Rita Morris, and we're having a great conversation about how we can support our teens through the process of divorce. So thank you so much, Rita. I just want to dive back in. So I love what you said about one of the ways that we can best support our teens and protect them from some of the harmful effects of divorce is maintaining that strong connection with them ourselves, being emotionally present for our teens and validating their feelings and what they're going through this process, and that's really the key. And we talked about some ways to practice self-care so that we can be emotionally present. And we talked about self-care, but what are some other things would you recommend? Would you recommend them, someone going through divorce, to work with a coach such as yourself, work with a therapist possibly to help work through some of those heightened emotions? What else would you recommend for them?
So, one of the things I tell everybody as they begin this process is the best thing you can do for yourself is to build yourself a strong team. And wherever the places are that you feel like you need the support, those are the people that you want to put in place. So, oftentimes I see, typically there's one partner in a relationship who, we all sort of take on our roles in relationships. So like one partner will take care of the finances, the other partner will take care of the house. And so then you have somebody who has no idea when it comes to finances. So if you don't have it, you don't know about the finances, find yourself a certified divorce financial planner who can help
Mhm.
you walk through that process. If I also see all the time, there's typically one parent who's been a primary caregiver and the other parent kind of is like, I don't even know who their primary care physician is. And so
Mm.
they need kind of the logistical and some of those like basic parenting skills kinds of things. So think about what have been my strengths in this relationship and what have been my weaknesses and where do I feel like I need that support, and put all of that stuff in place, because your outcomes are going to be so much better if as you go through this you feel like you have support.
Oh, I love that, because I absolutely agree that going through divorce, being a single parent, that we definitely need that community around us. I know for me, going through divorce, my church community was super important to me, and really helped me get through that. But whether it's church or a group of friends, or like you said, professionals such as a financial coach or a therapist or a mom's group, or whatever it may be for each person. But that community is so important. And being a single parent can be very challenging as well. So first getting through the divorce, but then learning how to navigate being a single parent definitely brings on its own challenges to learn to get through, right?
Even when you're only a single parent, say 50% of the time, it's tough.
Mhm.
And that's one of the, actually, I'm glad you said that, because that's one of the benefits of co-parenting. If you have a good relationship with your co-parent, let's just say you have 3 kids and two of them have a soccer game at 9 and another one has a soccer game at 9:30, and now you're like, how am I going to get all these people to all these different places at the same time?
Mhm.
if you have a good relationship with your co-parent, you're going to be able to say, uh, Sarah has a game at 9 and Thomas has a game at 9:30 and Jack has a game at, 10. Can you help me out with transportation? Right.
Mhm.
And so that's one of the things I say to people all the time. If you have a good relationship with your co-parent, it's good for you too, because you're going to get
Mhm.
that kind of support. And if you think about, is there anybody else on this planet that loves your kids the way you do, the way their parents
Mhm.
do? Probably not, right?
Right.
So even in all the difficulties of that relationship, you still share that common ground of that love for your kids.
Right, right. And I definitely came across that. We had three kids in soccer at the same time. So even working together, we couldn't manage all the games when
Right?
they were at the same
It's crazy with the amount of activities that kids do these days. Logistically, it's like a nightmare, you know?
time. Yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about, how we can work on having a good relationship with our soon to be ex partner, or, after the divorce. What are some ways that we can work on having that good relationship so that we can be good co parents?
So I'm going to say the first step is processing through all of those feelings, the resentment, or not necessarily processing through. In an ideal world, we get to process through the grief, the resentment, the anger, the frustration. But sometimes it's just too much. And there's so many things happening that you can't. But um, putting yourself in a place where, I often start with a values clarification exercise just for co-parents, so that when you get stuck and you find that you're super emotional right now and you're kind of making those decisions based on, I know it's going to really make my ex angry, and so this is what I'm going to do. Ask yourself the question, hold on, are you parenting from your values right now? And if you're
Mm,
not, then you get to take a step back and say, okay, what are my core values? And how do I want to parent from those core values right now? Right.
mm, right.
So taking a look at what's super, super important to you and then acting based on what's important to you
Mm. Yeah,
is
that
is a is
sounds.
a huge, huge piece. And then, the mindset shift of start to see this person not as your ex, but as your co parent. They are literally
Mhm,
your partner in the business of raising your kids. And so when you
mhm.
start to see them as that way, it's easier to separate the emotion from what you're trying to do, which is to raise happy, healthy kids,
Right, right.
you
Yeah, I
know?
can see that being so critical, that mindset change, that shifting from my ex to my co-parent. Like, we're working together as a team. But a lot of times working together as a team was not successful in the first place. So it's just what leads to divorce, right?
Right. Yes. Yes. And that's where the teaching piece comes in. It's the
Mhm.
teaching communication skills, teaching conflict resolution skills, even thinking about things like, is this a battle that I want to take on? Like, oh, my ex puts the kids to bed 30 minutes later than I do. Okay, do you want to take that on? Or do you want to take on, the fact that they're not showing up when they say they're going to show up? Like thinking about, okay, again, what's super important here and focusing on what's important um, is really, really key for everybody involved.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So
So
choosing your.
there's this whole set of skills to learn, and there's a
Mhm,
mindset shift that you have to learn.
mhm,
Um, and I think once you get those things in place, you're so much better off. And they're not, like you said, if it wasn't working in the marriage, how is it going to work post divorce? Because,
mhm,
like, if you think about it, nobody really teaches us communication skills. Nobody
mhm,
teaches us conflict resolution skills. we learn those things kind of from watching the people around us. And so to be able to have somebody who can say, let's think about a better way to say that. Like I talk a lot about diplomacy in communication. And once you have those skills, there's a lot less attacking and a lot more resolution.
Mm-hmm. So basically, what you're saying, whether it's pre-marriage, during marriage, or post-marriage, we all need to learn the skills of communication, conflict resolution, self-regulation.
100%. I've had so many people, Christina, have come to me and said, if I knew all this stuff, I probably wouldn't have even wound up divorced.
Right, right. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm thinking. It's like if we would have learned it before.
We wouldn't have wound up in this position, right?
Right, right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it just makes me think of our next generation and thinking of my kids who are all now in long-term relationships and talking about marriage and having grandbaby, have my first granddaughter and all of that. And it's like how important, having them learn those skills before they get married is just so critical. Um, but yeah, I see how, those are the challenges that come up in marriages and result in oftentimes divorce. And then we still need to learn it, not only to co-parent, but if we ever hope to remarry, if we don't want to continue the cycle. So it just all comes down to learning those skills and who you go about finding where you learn those skills, like you said. That's why I love what you do and your niche, because I think it's so important, because I just know how hard it is, going through a divorce, and how hard it is for the kids as well. um, to have someone like yourself who can help navigate that process and teach those skills along the way. Um, so what are some ways that you would go about, teaching some different skills? So you talked about communication a little bit. What are some tools that you would use for maybe conflict resolution?
Um, so, I talk about there's a an attorney in the field of divorce who's his name is Bill Eddy, and he talks about BIF communication, which is BIF stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. So if you put, okay, what am I trying to say? How do I want to say it? And put it in that format, you're going to wind up in a lot less conflict than you would to begin with. But then when you do find yourself in that conflict, being clear about, okay, what is this conflict about? Is it about old emotional stuff that's between myself and my co-parent? Or is this about we're doing things really differently, and I believe that you're not doing the right thing for our child? So get to the heart of what is the conflict really about is super, super important. And then being clear. So I talk about I feel statements, right? It's a kind of a basic thing, but we all, when we get emotional, it's hard to use those skills. So just learning, like, when this happens, I feel X, and I need Y. So when you're late to pick up the kids, I feel like the kids don't feel like they're important, and I feel like my schedule isn't important. And I need for us to figure out a way to do this better.
Mm.
You're always late, and it's so annoying, and it's so disrespectful. Think about what
Right,
the
right.
outcomes are going to be based on the presentation.
Right, right, definitely. Yeah. And like you mentioned too, like oftentimes in marriages and parenting, we often have two very different parenting styles, right?
Mhm. Hmm.
So then when, post divorce, like that comes up, even more, and can be more difficult to navigate because now we don't have as much say or influence over the other's parenting. And so learning those skills to communicate through that is just so critical. Yeah. Yeah.
I do a whole piece, Christina, on parenting styles. There's, in general, there are 4 different parenting styles. And so I will educate my parents on the 4 different parenting styles and help them to figure out, okay, where do you fall? Where do you think your co parent falls? And then
Mhm.
look at it through their lens of their parenting style. I think as humans, we in general all sort of think our way is the right way. So if we
Mhm.
think, okay, it's not necessarily that my way is the right way, it's that my way is different. And to think about, okay, what can kids learn from being parented differently? They're going to learn to manage
Mhm.
different personality styles, right? They're going to learn different communication styles because saying to mom, this is really annoying. I hate this. Mom's going to come back and say, okay, so let's talk about it. Saying that to dad, you're going to potentially get a totally different response. So now they're learning to manage different personality styles, different communication styles. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just different.
Mhm. Yes, I love looking at that way, that there's, things that our kids are going to learn from different parenting styles and that can benefit them because there are different personalities out in the world. And so learning to navigate different ways of dealing with those different personalities is important. So yeah, I love that you point that out. Well, this has been such a great, important conversation. I am so glad that you joined us today. Can you please tell our audience how they can learn more about your work?
Absolutely. Yes. So I have my website is thecoparentspath.com. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at the Co-Parents Path as well. Um, Let me see. I think those are probably the best ways to try to find me.
All right, wonderful. And before we end our show today, is there any last thing that you wanted to leave our parents with, or anything you didn't get a chance to talk about?
I think I just want to reinforce the concept that divorce is not necessarily bad for kids. It's how we manage it. So again, it's not your family structure, it's your family dynamic that's really going to make the biggest difference for your kids. And staying in an unhappy marriage is going to make you an unhappy person and an unhappy parent. And nobody needs to see that. And think about the power of what you're modeling for your kids. So if you're modeling a relationship where there's no communication, where there's no conflict resolution, where there's no affection, where there's no appreciation for each other, that sends a really powerful message to your kids about what relationships are all about.
Mhm.
So just thinking about what you're teaching them by what you do every single day is really, really powerful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's so important. Like you said, what we're role modeling, what we're teaching them. You know, marriage is, we're modeling for them what marriage should look like and
Yes.
how to be in a marriage and how, what we should accept or not accept, the boundaries that we should have. But also, like you said, role modeling those skills, those communication skills, those conflict resolution skills, those self regulation skills. And so learning those, is critical. So like we mentioned, whether it's before marriage, during marriage, or after marriage, those skills need to be learned. So the sooner that we can, learn those skills, then we can better navigate all relationships, whether it's relationships with our, significant others or our children or out else in the world. But those skills are important to for all relationships. And just because the divorce happens doesn't mean that the relationship is over, because we still have to co-parent.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. And also for our audience, if you have a teen, possibly, you're noticing through the divorce that you're noticing that the kids aren't handling it well. Maybe you are noticing signs of depression or other challenges. Then you can download my 10 ways to distinguish between typical teenage phase and teen depression on my website, empoweredparenting.family. And you can also pick up my book, The Power of Everyday Grace, Parenting Teens with Depression. It's available on Amazon. There's also a accompanying workbook that goes with that as well. So hopefully what we've discussed today can help prevent it from going there. But if you do see those signs and symptoms, then make sure that you, as we talked about, expanding that community, right? So getting the support for yourself, getting the support for your teen, and learning to best co-parent is so critical. So thank you again for joining us today, and we will see you next week.
Thanks for having me, Christina.
This has been Kicking Your Teen's Troubles to the Curb with host Christina Nation. Tune in each week as Christina features expert interviews, real-life stories, and practical strategies that empower parents to connect with their teens and effectively address their struggles. Here, Tuesdays, 11 a.m. Eastern, on the Bold Brave TV network, powered by B2 Studios.